The greatest prophecy teacher who ever lived was Jesus Christ. His greatest prophecy sermon is found in Matthew 24. It is called the Olivet Discourse, since it was spoken from the Mount of Olives in Israel. Today, we will analyze the teachings of Matthew 24 and discover their relevance to us today. Stay tuned for Politics and Religion.
Look, there are two things I don't discuss: politics and religion.
In my house, we don't talk about politics and we don't talk about religion.
I'll talk to you about anything except politics and religion.
I never talk about politics and religion.
Politics determines how we'll live here on earth. Religion determines how we'll live forever. I'm Irvin Baxter. I think it's time we talk about it. Sometimes we're sitting on a gold mine and we forget about it. However, as I was contemplating this broadcast today, I began to think about the teaching of Jesus Christ that he spoke on the Mount of Olives. If you've never been to Israel, then you've never witnessed this scene. But as you sit on the Mount of Olives, you can see a panoramic view of the city of Jerusalem. It is the most single awesome sight, in my opinion, in the world. I've been a lot of places in the world, but I've never seen any single thing that was more impacting to me than this panoramic view of Jerusalem. Now, when you're sitting on the Mount of Olives, you see the side of the Mount of Olives where the graves are stacked one against another. The Bible prophesies that would be so. And then you see the Kidron Valley, which separates the Mount of Olives from Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount. And then on the right-hand side is the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus prayed the night before his crucifixion. So as you're standing here, every way you look, it is absolutely laden with either prophetic significance or historic significance. Nevertheless, Jesus gave a prophecy from the Mount of Olives. Let's start from the beginning in Matthew chapter number 24, the most famous prophecy chapter in the entire Bible and consequently in the world. Jesus was at the temple. The disciples were showing him the beautiful buildings of the temple, and suddenly Jesus gives a prophecy. He's looking here at Herod's temple, which at that time was reputed to be the most beautiful building in the world. It was even said of that day, he that has never seen Herod's temple has never seen a beautiful building in his life. So here the disciples are showing Jesus this beautiful edifice, proudly showing him, this is the center of Jewish life. This is the place where Abraham raised the knife over Isaac. This is the place where Solomon built the first temple, and the fire fell from heaven, consumed the sacrifice at the dedication of that first temple, signifying God's approval on what was done there. Then that temple was destroyed in 586 BC. In 516, the second temple was dedicated, and then Herod came along, enhanced it, made it much larger, much more beautiful. So that's where the Jews found themselves. This is the place where Almighty God commanded them, you are to bring sacrifices here each year as an atonement for your souls. You're also supposed to come here to worship at the three major Israeli feasts per year. So everything was so critical about this, and the Jewish people, their heart was wrapped up in this. Of course, God had said 37 times in the Old Testament that he would put his name on the Temple Mount and here in the house of God. So the disciples were showing Jesus all this, and he just bust out with this prophecy. Undoubtedly, it was a big surprise to them. Jesus said, there shall not be, first of all, he said, see ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Now, this temple has now been standing for a long time. The second temple was completed about 516 BC. So 500 plus years, not counting the enhancements done by Herod the Great. So this was such a huge statement when Jesus said, not one stone is going to be left on another. It's not just going to be a decay or an attack. It is going to be total obliteration, not one stone left upon another. Well, that caused the disciples to say, Lord, when shall these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? That's what provoked Jesus to give to us the most famous prophecy chapter in the entire world, normally called the Olivet Discourse. So Jesus began to answer their question. They asked two questions. When shall these things be? That's number one. And what will be the sign of thy coming and the end of the age? So that was question number two. So Jesus begins to answer, and Jesus said, first of all, in verse number 6, and ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled. If you would like to hear of wars and rumors of wars, flip on your news station. You're going to hear it every day, all day. Turn on NPR, turn on Fox News, turn on CNN. You're going to hear wars and rumors of wars. I heard it this morning when I flipped my radio on. I heard about will we be getting out of Afghanistan? Will we be getting out of Iraq? Will we be going into Pakistan? How about Libya? Are we going to put ground troops into Libya? I mean, you talk about wars and rumors of wars. And it's amazing because President Bush was being so vilified for his wars, which I did not agree with. Now then, though, his successor, who ran on a platform of bringing peace and immediately getting our troops out of Afghanistan and out of Iraq, well, he's gone bigger, deeper. So he's done the opposite. He's more of a warmonger than George W. Bush has been. They both were pretty much warmongers. Nevertheless, look what's happening here. It's so interesting when you see this entire situation. So you're going to hear of wars, rumors of wars. So what should our response be to this? Should we be tied in knots mentally? Our nervous system be all upset? He said, no. See that ye not be troubled. Don't be troubled. So he said, you're going to see this, but don't let it affect you. Don't get your eyes on the wars and the rumors of wars. Don't get fixated on it. Do not let it trouble you, because you have got a higher purpose and a higher calling, and this is going to happen. There's nothing you can do about it. Therefore, do not be troubled. Then Jesus went on to say, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in different places. I'm sure by now you've heard of some poverty-stricken areas with famine. I am sure you have heard of outbreaks of E. coli, different pestilences. I am sure you have heard of an increase of earthquakes. You know, when I was studying this passage a little while back, I thought, okay, I want to be honest. You know, when we study God's Word or anything else as far as that goes, we need to be honest with ourselves. And so I thought, okay, here he's giving signs of his coming. Can I truthfully go to the microphone and tell people, okay, we've got this famine, we've got this pestilence, and we've got this earthquake, and therefore this is a sign that we are living in the generation of the second coming of Jesus Christ? And I thought, I can't do that, because they've always had pestilences. We had the Black Plague. They've always had famines, and there's always been earthquakes. So I was thinking about this. I said to my research assistant, I said, Tani, go find out the level of earthquakes over the last 100 years for me. I would like to see the pattern. She came back in a couple of days, just almost jumping up and down. She said, you got to see this. You have to see this. And she had tapped into the U.S. Geological Survey, which is where they keep the official records of earthquakes worldwide. And they in particular had a report of all earthquakes 6.0 or greater on the Richter scale, because that's where you're getting into the danger zone where damage can really happen. And she had analyzed the number of 6.0 and above earthquakes in each decade over the last 100 years. And it ran something like One year 25, next year 40, next year 60, next year 30, next year 50. It just bounced back and forth with an average somewhere, maybe 45 or 50 earthquakes in the world each decade, in each 10-year period. And this held all the way from 1900 until the year 2000. Then, when we got to the decade from the year 2000 to the year 2010, she said, you got to see this. So we've been averaging a low of 25, high of 62 for the last 100 years per decade. Earthquakes on 6.0 or above on the Richter scale. Now then, from 2000 to 2010, I looked at the number. I couldn't believe my eyes. 426. The biggest in any decade prior to this past decade was 60-some. None of them hit 70-some. So we jumped from the very highest of around 60 to 426 earthquakes in the last 10 years above 6.0 on the Richter scale. So, does that then mean that we can take that sign as a sign that we're living in the generation that will see the second coming of Jesus Christ? I don't think we can probably say that for positive just from that, but by the time we get done with this chapter, we will in fact be able to say that. So Jesus is teaching here things that he wanted you and me to know. The disciples, they weren't going to use this information. They're going to be dead and gone long before it appears. Now, one thing did come to pass. Not one stone shall be left upon another. 70 AD, some of these disciples were still alive. The Romans came in. They razed Jerusalem to the ground. Not one stone was left upon another. So here these disciples were that had stood or sat with Jesus on the Mount of Olives, and he told them, this is all coming down. How did they feel that day? While all the rest of the Jewish people were in trauma, what were the disciples that heard Jesus say those words? What were they thinking? What were they saying to everyone they met that day? Jesus told us this was going to happen. He told us 40 years ago that this place was coming down. I'm sure the apostles had preached this to people after Jesus Christ left. I mean, after all, Matthew, he recorded the words of Jesus here in Matthew 24. Luke recorded his version in Luke chapter number 21. Mark recorded his version in Mark chapter number 13. So all of them knew this was important. They all had set their pen to paper and they had recorded these things. So by now, a lot of people had read this prophecy, and we're dealing with people who lived on the earth when Jesus Christ lived on the earth. So the Christian revival was sweeping. It was raging. And now they're reading this prophecy, so many people knew that the temple was coming down. But when it happened, I'm sure many of them said, Jesus told us this was going to happen. This is amazing. The ones who knew in advance it was going to happen were not nearly as perturbed as those people who did not know the prophecy of Jesus Christ. So that's the way prophecy works. It's working for us like that, just like that right now as well, the time in which we live.
Endtime Ministries presents End of the Age, a 30-minute commercial-free TV show hosted by Irvin Baxter. Every Monday, End of the Age airs on the Church Channel at 9 p.m., Daystar at 10 p.m., and on TBN every Wednesday morning at 7 a.m., all Central Standard Time. On End of the Age, Irvin depicts how modern issues like an establishment of a one-world government, the religion of Islam, a coming World War III, and more line up so clearly with Bible prophecies written over 2,000 years ago. To get tomorrow's news today, be sure to tune into End of the Age every Monday on the Church Channel at 9 p.m., Daystar at 10 p.m., and on TBN every Wednesday morning at 7 a.m., all Central Standard Time. Visit endtime.com for more details or call us at 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463.
The Bible prophesies about 4